Well, welcome to Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. And whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, I'm so glad you're here. My goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today I am thrilled to welcome General Jack Shanahan. General Shanahan is a retired U.S. Air Force general who had a 36-year military career. In his final role, he served as the inaugural director of the U.S. Department of Defense Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, where he led efforts to integrate AI across the defense enterprise. Over his career, Jack held a variety of operational and staff positions spanning flying operations, intelligence, policy, and command and control. He commanded at the squadron, group, wing, agency, and numbered Air Force levels. As the founding director of the algorithmic warfare cross-functional team, Project Maven, he pioneered the DoD's first operational AI program, advancing the use of AI for military operations and intelligence collections and analysis. Jack earned a Master's of International Studies degree from North Carolina State and serves as the North Carolina State Shelton Leadership Center Board of Advisors. He is an adjunct senior fellow with the Center for a New American Security, Technology, and National Security Program, and a non-resident senior fellow with the Institute for America, China, and the Future of Global Affairs at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Additionally, Jack serves on numerous defense and intelligence-focused committees, boards, and advisory groups, and advises on the use of AI for national security. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the conversation we're about to have, which I'm sure will be both interesting and lively.
So, can you start us off by telling us where your story begins?
Well, interestingly enough, my story begins, I guess, in the state of Massachusetts, where I was born, and number 7 out of 9 children. My father was a college professor in the College of the Holy Cross. My mother was a saint who raised 9 children pretty well, gave up her own education along the way in college to raise the children. And from there on, I ended up probably, in terms of formative experiences, it's always hard to pin down one of them, but I knew early on that I liked the idea of something martial. Police, fire, used to think about what are those things that most interest me. In 1969 to 1970, my father was on sabbatical to a town called Duxford, England, near Cambridge. He was in sabbatical to Cambridge. Duxford back then was a very small glider airfield, but one of it got known very quickly. Today, it's the Imperial War Museum. It's a very famous war museum, since built up long after we left. But that year, they had just finished filming the Battle of Britain, and there were a couple of scenes that were filmed over the top of that airfield. And it was the first movie I had ever seen. My father took a couple of us to see it because there was a teenage party going on at our house, and he had no interest in sticking around to see what the teenage party was going to be all about. And the moment I saw that movie, I said, flying world, that's what I want to do. And that kind of pushed me down this track of a lot of twists and turns. Like everybody you have on here talks about strange paths their lives take, their careers take. But I'd say for me, that probably pushed me more than anything else toward an interest in flying and eventually fighter aviation, although that took a little bit longer to settle out.
So, was there a particular event or person that served as a catalyst for your career along the way?
There's never any one thing for me that decided my life or my career. I was fortunate to have, I say I never had a boss that I didn't really enjoy learning something from. Not every boss's style is a style that we all agree with, but I learned from all of them. But, I'm thinking about this, and when I was in the Pentagon in 2005-ish as a colonel, military assistant, toiling away in these very long, tough days in the Pentagon. There's a lot going on in the world in 2005, and my boss was very much engaged in things going on with the war in Iraq. And I didn't know where my career was going to go at that point. And I reached out to a mentor, and he said, well, I don't know either what's going to happen to you. You're not necessarily on a track, off a track. You're in a good job in the Pentagon, but within a year, I got picked up for a strange command opportunity that I did not expect. Was the command and control wing, the 505th Command and Control Wing down at Hurlburt Field in Florida. And from that point on, thanks to some bosses, I think that intervened behind the scenes. I would never point to any one thing that happened, but that got me on the path toward being a general officer, multiple command opportunities, and then life took off on its own. Up to that point, it was, I'm sure you hear this from a lot of different people. It's almost maybe sounds like a cliche, but no matter where you go, you do the best job you can possibly do. You take care of the people around you. You do what you need to do for the people above you. You take care of the people below you, and things generally have a way of working out. I wasn't sure in my case, and as I say, I took every bridge when I got to it. I did not have a career plan. I did not have 36 years mapped out. If you gave me the paradise and said, roll these 100 times, one time and one time only does it come up with three-star general working artificial intelligence in the Pentagon in my final 5 years. The rest of them, they're a bunch of craps. There are probably some sixes and fives, but only one time does it come up at the end of my career being a three-star. I never could have predicted. I was very fortunate. I feel kind of humble about it, to be honest with you. That's not false humility. I honestly did not expect to end up where I ended up at the end of my career. Very fortunate.
So I know every journey, has its hurdles. Can you tell us what some of the biggest obstacles were that you faced in your career and how you overcame them?
Yeah, there's so many hurdles that get thrown in your way, and I think about this, and at least in one branch of the Shanahan family tree, somewhere in Ireland, there is a motto for the family that in Latin is "nec dejectus nec elatus," which roughly translates as neither dejected nor elated. So no, not too many highs, not too many lows. You have to learn to deal with every curveball that life throws at you. And life throws a lot of curves at all of us. So the idea of you kind of at some point you got to shrug off the bad things. You embrace the things that happen that are good for you, and you just keep plowing ahead. I can think I tell this story once in a while. It's been a while since I've mentioned this, but during that period in the Pentagon when I was a one star, it was like 2011 to 2013. I mean, it was 90-hour work weeks. Life was hard. You go home at the end of the night, and there were nights, I mean, very long 90-hour work weeks, and you just go, I don't want to do this anymore. I just can't deal with it. 24 hours later, just like it always does, life looks a little better. Then you do something in your job in the Pentagon that has an impact on people in combat, downrange, and potentially could even be helping to save people's lives. So that's the high part of it. You just have to figure out how you personally balance that out in your life. And it's not easy. I would never claim that I figured out how to do it the best way I could do it, but I did figure out that no matter what life throws at you, you sort of shrug a little bit, embrace it, and then just keep going. And so that's the way I've tried to approach things ever since.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective. So I know you were the founding director of Project Maven, which is first operational AI initiative by the Department of Defense. What problem was Project Maven trying to solve? And can you tell us a little bit, about that?
Yeah, it's almost become a cliche at this point because so much has written about Maven and AI in general. But the problem was what everybody encounters when they try to figure out if AI is the right solution for the problem they're dealing with. And for us, it was intelligence analysts. The problem was very narrow. It was tailored to intelligence analysts that are looking at full motion video off of drones, predators and reapers, MQ-1s, MQ-9s. Global Hawks became something else we started working after a while, some satellite image, but the core problem was intel analysts during combat operations in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, Horn of Africa. All of this had people staring at video screens, and it was they would sit there and stare at these screens for 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 hours at a time. It's mind-numbing work. And it was even worse than that because this information they would try to collect and process and translate as humans would involve things like Microsoft PowerPoint and Word and spreadsheets, and you cut and you paste, and it was a horrible existence. And we knew that we were going to get even more collection. Like the world is changing in a way that you're just going to get more and more data. This is 2017. The numbers were staggering then; they're incomprehensible today in terms of the amount of data an Intel analyst has to take in. But in this case, we decided that was the problem we needed to solve. We knew we would start drawing down from the Middle East. irony of ironies, we haven't really fully drawn down for the Middle East. But at the time, it was clear that we thought that the fight was going to shift to the Indo-Pacific, and China was going to be the primary competitor slash adversary. And we knew we were going to have to come up with a different way than analysts just as humans sitting there staring at the screen. We could find nothing in the Department of Defense that could solve that problem. I'll use the term that sometimes you hear in commercial industry, particularly Silicon Valley. We don't want a 2x solution or a 5x solution. We wanted a 50x solution, something that would be considered transformational. And Katrina Manson, the journalist from Bloomberg, has written a book about Project Maven, which I recommend to your listeners because it's a really good personal dynamic story. It's less about the technology itself and more about the dynamics of the Marine Corps Colonel Drew Kukor, who took it personally to go fix this problem. He had been in combat. He had seen people die because of using old technology. And so Drew showed up at the right time as we were struggling to figure out how we're going to deal with this massive information problem. As I said, they could not find it in the military research labs. Wonderful research they were doing. And I'm never going to say anything disparaging of our research labs, but they'd had nowhere near the compute power that Silicon Valley had. They didn't have the PhD talents in artificial intelligence that Silicon Valley had. So they went out to Silicon Valley, talked to some very small startup companies, and then engaged in a conversation that's, yeah, I think we have something that could help you. It's called computer vision. It's called machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing. And from that point on, put a little small demonstration together. And the number 2 guy in the department at the time, Bob Work, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, saw the demonstration and said, that's it. From this point on, you are Project Maven, AKA the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team, very deliberately named that way. It's a name nobody uses because it's kind of too hard to spit out. So it became Project Maven, and we were off to the races. And that was the journey that then turned into, about a year and a half after that got started, I was asked to then stand up the DoD Joint AI Center, which is to try to do AI for the rest of the Department of Defense that Project Maven wasn't doing, which was all about intel for Project Maven. So we showed enough success in Maven to say, yeah, this stuff is not a miracle cure right off the bat, but we could see the potential. And this is a big learning point, I think, for everybody. First of all, you don't start with AI in search of a problem. You have a problem you can't solve in any other way. You need AI. But the second piece of it, I guess I'd say, is so instrumental to every day. And Katrina gets this pretty correct in the book, in my opinion. You walked in every day with a vision thinking we're going to change the world. It was like this feeling of an elite team, kind of like a special operations and SEALs and Delta and Rangers and all the ones you're very familiar with. You just kind of had a feeling that nobody else is doing what you're doing. And then if it works, someday the military is going to be very different. So that was the way we lived our life every day. It was struggle, as you can imagine. These are two, like I was a CEO, to use kind of the vernacular of the Valley, the CEO of 2 AI startups in the Pentagon. And that was about as difficult as you can imagine. I mean, there was nothing easy about the knife fights and the bureaucracy every single day to get an organization up and running. It was a people problem, it was a money problem, it was a facility problem, it was a technology problem. All of that wrapped together into a culture that did not want to change, that was very comfortable in sort of an industrial age, hardware-centric way of doing things. And we were trying to bring the entire military into this software age and think about what was a digital way of doing business. That was, I make it sound kind of a little trivial today. It was exceedingly challenging to pull that off.
Now, well, startup culture and Pentagon bureaucracy, I can
Yeah, they
only
almost are
imagine.
oxymoron, right? It's almost an oxymoron. You have institutional concerns that have been deep rooted for 50, 60 years in the Pentagon, and you're saying, no, we want to go with a 12-person startup company in Silicon Valley. Whoa, what are you thinking here? What are you doing? And then we got Google on contract to take on one of our other really big problem sets. And that probably more than anything else opened a lot of eyes. Like, who is this little team called Project Maven that now has Google, one of the world's biggest company at the time in software and soon to be AI. And they did some incredible work with us, despite the drama that came later in the story when they didn't renew their contract because of the protests inside the company. But it was it really was every day was a new adventure. It's my journey of discovery was the learning curve was as steep as it could possibly have been because that was not what I was hired to do. I came in for another reason to be a 3-star in a different job in the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. So now I had a night job, so to speak, standing up this AI organization. And every day I was learning something new. The vocabulary was different, the technology was different, the acquisition processes were different. All of that we were learning on the fly, made plenty of mistakes. But today you look back and go, Katrina's written this book about Project Maven. I go, we gave birth to this baby, different set of parents have raised the child since then, and you don't know quite how it's going to come out. But it is the one AI project I can point to in the entire department that has scaled so much beyond those original early days. Other projects are becoming successful, but I haven't seen anything that's quite matched the scale of Project Maven, which is used in every combatant command around the globe right now and is being deeply integrated into everything you see the military doing. So it's kind of one way, it's sort of amazing to sit back and watch how this is all played out.
My grandmother used to say the proof is in the pudding. And I think
Yeah,
Project Maven was an example
yeah,
of that.
yeah, and not, some of the pudding didn't taste so good the first time, second time, third time, but we kept working on the recipe, and the pudding got better and better, and then all of a sudden people are saying, this pudding's okay, before you know it, they're asking for more pudding.
So, how can leaders build trust when you're trailblazing something new? Which for you, you had, new organization and also this new technology that had not been integrated at this level before.
Yeah, it's a really important question. The way I answer it is when I talk about AI in the government, like everybody else, I use a series of slides that talk about it. I have 2 slides. There are about 12 things on those 2 slides that say, here's how you succeed in AI in the government. And I show those 2 slides and I ask everybody, okay, what did you not see on the slide? Only one time has somebody immediately said technology. Technology is not one of the 12 things on those 2 slides. It's everything about alignment and vision and networking and beating the bureaucracy and glass breakers, disruptors, all these different things, authorities. But technology is generally seen as the commodity here that we had to bring in from commercial technology companies and adapt for DoD purposes. But the key to all of this, it will not surprise you or anybody that's listening that's been in any government organization or probably, same thing in commercial world. It's about culture first and foremost. It's about building a culture where you respect each other, you believe in each other, you sometimes disagree with each other, but you build this culture of trust. And I trust you, you trust me. We're in this for the reasons that we're trying to make the military better. I'd never tried to give anybody the impression that I wasn't going to go any further. I knew that 3 stars was more than I ever expected. So I was quite happy to be where I was. So this was no longer about, hey, this is in, we're going to do something different, but we're only going to do it this way. If somebody had a better idea, I can promise you I was willing to say, let's try it. Let's give it a shot. If we failed, we talk about it on Friday afternoon, get everybody together and say, okay, what did everybody figure out this week? Who did good? Who did bad? What do we learn from that? It was sort of what I go back to. I'm a weapons school graduate, instructor, was a commander out there in the strike eel world, but once upon a time. And the famous motto of the weapons school is you talk about results, mistakes, and lessons learned, not excuses. And I wanted to always bring that into these organizations like, okay, let's learn from it. We're not going to point fingers at anybody and say, what do we get wrong? And it became a little bit about us against them being the bureaucracy and us being we were going to be the people that slayed the dragon of bureaucracy. Very hard to do. And there were some tough fights. We lost some of the fights. But all of this was, let's come back together at the end of the week and say, how do we keep moving? What do we need to do? I was very receptive to new ideas. Probably the single best example that I have when I got to the Joint AI Center, we had nobody like this in Project Maven, is I brought in a chief technology officer a gentleman by the name of Nan Molchandani. Serendipity, the story that he tells about how we came together, it's funny, but it was almost by pure accident that I ended up hiring him. He changed the organization overnight. Here's somebody that comes in from Silicon Valley, the cyber world, software world, built companies, sold companies, CEO, founder, co-founder, all of that. Then he comes in with no government experience, which is just what I wanted him not to have, was government experience, no bad habits. And from day one, he says, what the hell are we doing? Why are you doing it that way? I said, I don't know. Shall be a better way to do it. Okay, let's do that. And then he'd say, well, what's this JADC2 thing? I said, I can actually teach you a thing or two. So we ended up on this pretty much an everyday journey of learning from each other and helping each other out, where I began to speak a little bit more fluently in the language of Silicon Valley. And he began to not only speak well about military operations, by the time he was done there, he was speaking more about intelligently about AI in the military operations than any general officer or admiral that I knew in the Pentagon. He really had advanced his own education process so he knew what this was all about. He after I had retired, he stayed a while longer and then went over to the CIA to be their first chief technology officer. He since has left the CIA. He's back in startup mode in Silicon Valley because he's a sadomasochist and he can't get enough of this stuff. But that's the example of somebody comes in and says, well, what are we doing? Why are we doing? What should we be thinking about? And it really, the entire organization was trying to learn from each other. I did not have a lot of AI expertise. I got who I got in those early days, which that was one of the starkest differences from anything in Silicon Valley. Because if you're going to found a company, you're going to pick your co-founder, you're going to pick your CTO, your COO, you're going to start small and you build up. I didn't have that luxury. It's like move. We're not moving fast enough. Just get the team. The services will give you whoever they give you, figure it out. It was one of those things like, okay, this is maybe going to be a little harder than I thought I was going to do. Maven was a very small, narrowly focused, tight team. A lot of Marine Corps reservists that Drew Cooker had brought in. He took care of all that. Now I was responsible for building an organization. The day I walked in the job, I had 4 people that reported to me. By the time I left, I think we had about 150 people. We started with no money, ended up with about a $1.2 billion 5-year budget, and we had no place to work out of for a little while, and then we had this beautiful new facility, all that stuff in 18 months. It was just crazy dynamic change, and to see kind of how things are today, it continued down that path. So you go back to what you asked about, it's trust. There absolutely must be trust. It's a two-way level of trust. The idea that I've emphasized in every command job I've ever had is professional dissent. Don't make it personal, but if you disagree, I want to hear why you disagree. Give me the evidence about why you disagree, and then I'll figure out the decision I'll make. But once I make the decision, we're all rowing, just like the Norwegians on the World Cup. They're all rowing in the same direction at some point. We weren't beating a drum, but it was important that we ended up rowing. And if you had somebody that was not rowing, or they were rowing in another direction, there were some decisions had to make about maybe getting somebody else to replace.
I like the term professional dissent.
Yeah,
That's a great term.
Yeah, I've thought very carefully about that over the years, and I found it to be effective. Sometimes it hurts to hear the truth, but you get isolated. The higher you get, the more isolated you are. There's no question about it. Anybody who's ever been at flag or general officer rank will tell you that. Some embrace it, some love it. To me, it became uncomfortable because I knew I wasn't getting the rest of the story. Not Molchandani, no hesitation to tell me I was full of, you know what, and that was good. That's what I needed to hear. Kicking the ass, as we say.
So what do you think is a misconception that people have when it comes to AI and national security?
That it's all about drones. Drones, the drones, of course, they're going to get the headlines, and they should get a lot of headlines, but it's all been about AI and drones. There's so many other applications of AI. We weren't even, so Maven was about AI and drones to begin with, but these weren't weapon drones. These were intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance drones. Everything else we ended up taking on in the Joint AI Center had very little to do with that. We did medical, we did personnel, we did warfighter health kind of things. We did humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. They don't get a lot of headlines. Probably the thing you're seeing today that AI is being used most for is some of the day-to-day administrative drudge work that we all do that makes it a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient. It just does, it's never going to get the headlines that drones. And don't get me wrong, we should talk a lot about drones. But I grew up in a culture, and your listeners, anybody who's been in the military, we actually have a very well established process to bring in new technology, understand how it works, what are the rules of engagement. We still follow the law of armed conflict. AI doesn't obviate the presence of rules of engagement in the law of armed conflict. All those things don't go away. So I still think, have a very deliberate process to use technologies responsibly, to include the drone piece of it. But it is true that people are very concerned about drones going out and making life and death decisions on their own. I am equally concerned about that. I have never known a commander, myself included, that ever wanted a drone to make life and death decisions. So the difference is where the human actually intervenes to make those kind of decisions to the machine to execute it. Having machines decide on their own to do that is a different world. And that's a world that I actually become increasingly concerned about with these things that you might hear called agentic AI. So a fully autonomous weapon system with AI and agents, if it starts deciding what the right course of action is in the machine's mind versus what the human told it to do, that's something we need to think a lot more about and think carefully and deliberately about before we put those kind of systems anywhere near combat operations. But short of that, I actually am very comfortable with how AI can be used in drones, and we're seeing that in the war between Ukraine and Russia right now. It's a very typical historical cat and mouse game with technology. Somebody develops a technology, the other side counters it, the other side counters the counter, and so on. That's no different with AI, but it is what probably would surprise most people that aren't paying close attention to that conflict is how rapidly things are changing. The pace of change in the world of AI, it's blistering. I don't know how else to say it. It's just shocking how much has changed just in the past 18 months with these things called frontier models, these large language models that are performing at levels that 2 years ago people said hopeless. It will never get to where it is. And we keep beating these so-called benchmarks. They keep getting better. Now they're getting so advanced. Me, the person that used to talk about how fast we need to bring in AI to the military, is starting to say things like, let's be a little bit cautious here about these technologies that are going to have massive impacts in wartime. So we got to think through what the implications of that are.
The responsible utilization of AI is, a hot topic. And I know you mentioned some of the concerns that I've been hearing as well. Where's the human in this kill chain here
Yeah.
with expanding capabilities? Can you talk to us about, responsible AI, guardrails, policies? I mean, what are your thoughts on kind of how we move forward with this crazy, fast evolving technology?
I learned a lot from those early days of Project Maven. One of the things that really resonated and drove home with me the importance of responsible AI, which is why when I stood up the Joint AI Center, I hired someone to bring in or stand up a division just for this idea of AI assurance, which is really responsible AI. Now, I only had one person to begin with. She was very, very good and made enormous amount of progress with very limited resources. And we slowly built out the team. I knew how important this was going to be. Just because with the Google, the sort of drama that happened, I realized that our view of the world was not the same as everybody else's view of the world. And we needed to be more transparent about explaining how this AI would be used for national security. So we started this. And one of the signature things that I'm most proud of, nobody ever talks or writes about this because they don't have to. It's not that important on the outside looking in, but it's probably one of the most consequential things we did at the time in the Joint AI Center is get the Secretary of Defense to sign out the DoD AI ethics principles. That was the result of 18 months of work by something called the Defense Innovation Board. Dr. Heather Roth, who's kind of a philosopher come ethicist on the side, but also knows AI, had done a lot of work developing these principles. They presented them to me. We changed not the words themselves, but some of the definition words to make it more operationally focused. But other than that, those were 5 words: responsible, equitable, reliable, traceable, and governable. I never forget them. Presented that to the secretary in early 2020, and he signed them out. And then after I retired, the next big step was to put an implementation plan. It's one thing to have AI principles, ethics principles, how do you actually implement them? And those were conversations, early conversations we were beginning to have with companies, very favorable, by the way. The company's like, yeah, we think we can do this, but we can't do that. How do we work through this and whatever? But that was the beginning of what I call responsible AI, or AI assurance was this other term that you'll hear a lot of people in the AI world talk about. For us, I defined AI assurance as responsible AI plus AI test and evaluation. The test and evaluation piece is so critical to all of this. We had to include that in this definition of AI assurance. And that's continued apace. But the point is, this technology is becoming so sophisticated, so advanced, you start having life or death consequences. You do have to put in something to understand where this technology is going to work, where it might not work, where it could fail, what it looks like when it does fail, where does the human come in and intervene? All those are questions that at the time we were just scratching the surface. But now, if I were to say what is one area that concerns me a little bit about what I see today from the Pentagon, I'm all for speed. I'm all for lethality. That was the world I grew up in. But you can't have those two things and dismiss the idea of responsible AI. There's too much at stake to get this wrong. There's a moral dimension, there's an ethical dimension. We do need to put some time into thinking about how do you test for this. These models will become so advanced, we may be surprised that they operate in ways that never could be anticipated during testing. So what do you do to put in place? Where does the human intervene? What you just said is really important to me. What I don't use anymore is I used to use it all the time. I don't, I'll explain why in a minute. I don't use the terms in the loop, on the loop, out of the loop. I don't think they're useful anymore. And I think it confuses people. Instead, I say the entering argument, the basic premise of AI and national security is there must be human control. The billion-dollar question is where, when, and how does that human control get applied? In general, as we go more and more autonomy, it'll be further and further left in the process, so to speak. So that means we need a different approach to design and development and testing and red teaming to understand earlier on how these things may fail, what happens when they fail, where and when does the human intervene. These are questions that are paramount, not only in national security, but in society today. They're beginning to ask those same questions because we see examples of some of the highest, intelligent machines, so to speak, taking actions that the researcher is finding maybe that's not what the human quite wanted the machine to do. The machine decided how to achieve its objective function, so to speak, in a manner different than initially prescribed. So that is surprising some people. So in the military, we can't afford to do it any other way because when it goes wrong for everybody. It'll go wrong globally. We'll all pay the price for it. So I think it's not a question of speed or rigor. It's rigor and speed together. And we showed in Maven and JAIC, you can do both. And as we get to more and more autonomy, there is no question we have to figure this out. Or the alternatives, we actually should slow down just enough to make sure that we can do both of those things properly.
So as AI, becomes more capable, these technologies, they're able to do more things. How do you think leaders should shift their approach, especially regarding, this kind of evolving relationship, if you will, between humans and kind of machines?
Yeah, there is a generational aspect to this. I feel like that as hard as I worked, I still, would never claim fluency in AI. I feel like, yes, I understand enough about it to speak fairly coherently on it, but I think there's a new generation of leaders coming up that will be better prepared for this future. And to your core of your point and your question here, to me personally, I think over the next few years, this idea of human machine interaction will be one of the most important things the military is going to need to look at. It's important in autonomous vehicles and commercial industry. It's just as important or even more important when you start thinking about combat operations. And there are, look, there have been experts on human machines teaming for 50 years. Everybody their great researchers have looked at how do humans and machines operate. This is entirely different. We're looking at so-called intelligent machines that are going to do things that we've just never seen before. So I don't even use the word team anymore. The same person I mentioned earlier, Heather Roth, she kind of dissuaded me from saying that word when you're talking about a machine. The word team is usually meant for human to human interactions, and it's anthropomorphic when applied to AI. So instead, I say human machine interaction. I don't, everybody uses the teaming thing. I get it, but that's the reason I have no longer used it. But I think this idea of this spectrum of on one end, I can completely see a future where you have machines against other machines. Electronic warfare and cyber are the two that most come to mind. On the other end of the spectrum, AI and nuclear weapons. The two shall never meet. That is a human decision. President Biden, President Xi Jinping last year made an agreement. Only humans will launch nuclear weapons. Everything else, I think, in the middle is going to be a very dynamic, constantly changing ratio of human smart machine. And we don't know quite how to get that right yet because the machines are evolving so fast. It's going to require a lot of experimentation, so-called sandbox environments. For the military, you'll understand, the idea, the progression is normally you do the test and evaluation, you do some experiments, then you're into exercises, then you're into joint training, combined training, simulators, academics, all these bits and pieces have to come together. But there has to be a recognition that the world is changing of AI is changing so rapidly that you need people that are really intellectually agile and capable of adapting on short notice. If there are three words that come out of the fight in Ukraine and Russia, it's agile, adaptive, and ingenuity. You got to be adaptive. You got to have a lot of agility, and three, ingenuity. Those are the kind of things I expect our leaders of the future to have to approach. But you've got to go in the sort of a complete open slate on what right looks like with human machine interaction. I think it's going to be redefined very frequently. And we're only going to figure that out in this so-called idea of playing around with these things. And you'll hear the term digital twins or world models, very sophisticated representations in a digital world of the physical things you're trying to do in the so-called real world. Lots going on in that area right now, but we need a lot more of it. I'm not sure the government is capable of building those sort of world models in the timeframes we need. So probably some kind of public-private partnership, relying on companies to come in and say, okay, how do we actually work through what the right level of human machine interaction is? And this is going to be a really big area of research over the next few years because we're just seeing these capabilities every 24 hours. We're seeing something new come out.
Yeah, I've never seen, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen a technology progress and change so fast.
Yeah, it's fair by us. Some people that are historians, social scientists, or studied military technology have made some pretty good, I think, analogies to say the beginning of the 20th century, where technologies were rapidly coming on the scene, like the idea of going from sail to steam or electricity being adopted by the military. Those are all quite legitimate. Like, hey, we've seen this story play out before, so let's not try to claim it's that different. What is different, I think, is just the pace of change. It's when a new frontier model is being put out by either the US, China, or somewhere else around the world every couple of months. This is not a decade in the making. This is not 20 years of figuring out how electricity gets into Navy ships. It's holy cow, we got something new. How do we figure out how do we integrate it? What does it work? The military kind of used to a 10, 15-year, 20-year process to bring in a new piece of hardware. The F-22, is beautiful new airplane that it is, took something like 20 years to get to production and full capability. That's not going to work anymore. It has to be how quickly can we bring these in, test them, get them in the field, constantly updated, sustain the updates. I mean, these are things that the government has to work its way through right now, just because the pace of change is unlike any technology in history. It's not that this is more disruptive than any technology. That case remains to be made by the people who look back 50 years from now and declare this was the beginning of the digital revolution. I don't call it the fifth industrial or fourth industrial revolution. I think someday it will be seen as a digital revolution all unto its own, but I don't get to decide that. The same thing in the terms of the disruptive piece of it. It does feel extraordinarily disruptive, but I imagine it was the same way throughout history, where people, the famous Luddites having to adapt to automating the mills and the looms and all those things that happened, very disruptive to their individual lives, but also played out on a longer time frame than we're seeing with AI today. So figuring out that no, it's not all new, but it is enough new that we need a new way of thinking about a technology that is so disruptive in such a compressed time frame.
Well, General Shanahan, do you have any final words of advice or parting thoughts for the audience today?
I would say if the question of AI is no longer a matter of if, it's when. Um, but what I'm very deliberate in saying is it feels like we spent the last 5 or so years in this world of technological determinism, where basically you have a lot of AI big tech companies claiming, take it, you're going to love it, you don't get a choice in it. Here's how it's going to be. That doesn't work. And we're beginning to see sort of a younger generation begin to get kind of upset about things like data centers or job loss. This needs to be a national conversation. And I mean down at the lowest level in cities and towns and universities and town halls where people get together and say, is this good? Is it bad? Why? And work their way through this. I think we really need to give the average American citizen a greater voice in what this technology does for all of us, rather than assuming it's all going to be for the benefit of mankind. I don't know of any single technology in history that turned out solely to be beneficial. There's always a downside to every technology in history, and AI is going to have some significant downsides. And so it requires sort of this national conversation about what are those downsides, how do we account for them, how do we mitigate the risk, and now bring that inside the national security enterprise. And it requires that same kind of thinking about it's just a piece of technology until we do something with it. It's the doing something with it that requires sort of this new generation of leadership to say, okay, got some cool ideas. Let's go out and wring them out in the experimentation phase before we figure out. It's going to require redefining organizations, probably reforming organizations. It's going to have a lot of changes that we're not probably fully prepared for yet. So having this idea of agility and adaptability is going to be probably some of the most important characteristics of human beings. And what I always want to say, I guess the last thing I'll say is keep that thing between your ears engaged. This is the human intellect is a greater demand for this than any time in history. Yeah, we probably need more STEM graduates. You know what I want to see more of? Liberal arts graduates to think their way through the ramifications of the technology that is impacting society. The engineers haven't fully figured out how those technologies are going to impact people. I need the combination of the liberal arts and the STEM majors to get together and figure out what looks better for humans over the next 50 years, because it will not look different in 50 years than it looks today. I don't know what it looks like, but it's not going to look like this.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences today. I know your contributions to our nation have impacted so many around the globe, and appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on and spend some time with you.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. I hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think about our future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.